of Genesis. If you look on the pew where you're sitting, toward the inside of the aisles, there's an updated schedule. And I emphasize again, it's a tentative schedule in that we're already behind schedule. As you can see, tonight is the 16th, and we're supposed to be on the curse of sin, chapter 3, but we're not there, obviously. And so we're not going to get too overwhelmed or too excited about the fact we're not exactly on schedule, but I wanted to give you that just so you at least know where we're going. We might not get there when this particular document says that we're going to get there, but you at least know where we're going, all right? And so eventually we'll get around to chapter 3 here, but still got some time that we need to take in chapters 1 and 2 in dealing with our God and the fact that the Bible states that he is our creator. Whenever we are introduced to God, we're simply introduced to God. He's a given. And of course, whenever you go to places like the book of Romans chapter 1, and you look there beginning at verse number 18, Paul makes a point here. He's actually making a case for divine jurisprudence. In other words, the fact that God is a judge. He sits in judgment of humanity. Obviously, he's got the right to do that because he created us, which is the point that we're really getting at. But he'll talk about the fact that man's gradual descent into atheism, which God condemns, and that's what Paul is bringing up, is the fact that we look at the Gentile nations, they separated themselves from God, rendering themselves needful of the system of justification, God's system of justification, or the gospel. They need it. That's the point that Paul is making. The gospel is God's power to save all men, but he makes the point at the outset of the book of Romans is that they all need it. And of course, it's a good point to be made because so many people walk around this planet not even knowing that they need a Savior or that they need to be saved from something. But the point that we want to make is this. In verse number 18, it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold," or a better translation might be, "suppress the truth in unrighteousness." So God's wrath is poured out of heaven against all unrighteousness, all ungodliness. Those who are suppressing the truth is the focus of Paul's point here. And how are they suppressing the truth? What truth are they suppressing? Well, you read the subsequent verses and you understand that the truth that they're suppressing is the truth of the existence of God. They have descended into atheism is what Paul is dealing with. And of course, once you get down to verse number 24, he talks about all of the gross and horrible behavior that accompanies an atheistic worldview. But he says in verse number 19, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in him, for God has shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." But notice what he goes on to say, "Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations. Their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools," the Bible says, "and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things." And so Paul says that the problem that eventually becomes man's is the fact that they turn their backs on God. They tried to write God out of existence. I was reading this afternoon a particular document where a philosopher by the name of Nietzsche or something of that nature, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but sometime in I think it was the 17 or 1800s, come out with the expression, "God is dead." God is dead. And of course, you know that's been a slogan that's got a lot of popularity over the last couple of years. Movies been made about those who have subscribed to that particular mindset. But again, that's where man is. And he hasn't been here recently, and that's not just recently. He arrived here. Paul, 2,000 years ago, is looking back in time from his perspective and saying that this was the essential problem with man. But when you open the book of Genesis simply tells us that God created heavens and earth. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. We're not given any type of explanation. We're not given any type of apologetic discourse in regards to the existence of God. Moses didn't need to. And he teaches us that God's presence, that his existence is so very evident that all he simply needs to do is introduce him. So you ever thought about anything that is so evident that all you have to do is just talk about it? What are some things that fall into that category? And then most everybody can join in a conversation with you because it's such common knowledge. What is something that falls into that category? Anything, man. You guys awful quiet. What's that? The 80s. Say it again. Oh, A&M, the Aggies. I thought you said the 80s. I'm like, man, I don't know about that. Some of us could talk about the 80s. There's some in here who might not be able to talk about the 80s. The Aggies. I don't know about that either. No, I'll behave. I'll be good. But yes, definitely here in College Station, and everybody knows, man. It's common knowledge. It's common knowledge. All right. What else? Anything else falls in that category? Yeah, in some places, in some circles, definitely farming. It's common knowledge. All right. And so Moses simply introduces God, and then he begins to talk about the things that God creates. As I was looking at the lesson for this evening, it reminded me of something where we've gotten into some of the days of creation and some of the things that God has created so far. I think we got to day number 3, and we'll commence with the next 3 days here in just a moment. But John McCormack's a good friend of mine. Some of you guys might know John, know that John knows McCormack. And good friend, we've been good friends for a very long time. His oldest daughter, I think, what is she, maybe 17, 18 years old right now, but whenever she's a little bitty baby, she's a toddler, John and Holly came to where I was preaching, and John was doing a gospel meeting for us, and it was their anniversary in the week that they were doing the gospel meeting, and so Sheena and I, took care of their supper that night and let them go out and have their anniversary. At that time, they only had one child, and so we said, look, we'll keep Lucy. She can stay with us, and you guys go out and have fun tonight. And so little Lucy was so funny. She'd come in our house, she's so inquisitive. And so, man, she was this very personable person, and she was looking around, man, she was only about, maybe 2.5 years old at that time. So I'm carrying her around the house, and everything she sees, she's like, what's that? And so we probably got about 683 what's that night. And so we explained to her, and I think before the night was over, she knew what everything in the house was, because she had asked that question. But little ones are inquisitive. They want to know what things are. Whenever we look at the days of creation, not only do we need to be interested in what God created, but we need to be interested, at least to some degree, into how it functions or what it was for. What did God create these things for? He didn't do anything arbitrarily. Didn't create anything for nothing. Everything had a function and a purpose, and that's one of the things that highlights the beauty of God, the sovereignty of God. As we mentioned on last week, the love that God has for humanity, because we know that the pinnacle of his creation is going to be humanity on the 6th day, but up until that 6th day of creation, everything that he is creating is for man. Everything that he makes. How do we know that? I mean, you've read the book of Genesis. You read chapter 1 anyway. How do we know everything that he made was for us? Because, there are entities that exist among us right now who don't believe that's the case. And you got those who have this radical idea that the earth wasn't made for us, but that we are leeches. What's the word that they utilize? Not leeches, parasites. They say we're just parasites on the earth. And they act like the earth is preeminent over us or more important than we are. But we know that's not the case. How do we know that from the Genesis account? Say it again? We're the only thing that God made in his image. We're the only thing that God made in his image. And so that's definitely one way to be able to ascertain that information, that we are more important than the earth on which we live and the animals that we live here with. But what else? How else do we know that? He told us to have dominion over the animals and over all the earth. He told us to have dominion over it. And so we know there from his explicit commandment that the earth is ours, that he made it for us. He didn't need it for him. He didn't need it for him. All right, the Bible lets us know that heaven is God's domain. That's where his throne is in heaven. And we see that in many of the Psalms. Earth is created for us. And so we'll take a look at some of the things that he created again. So what have we looked at so far real quickly? We looked at days 1 and 2 of creation. What have we seen him create? Anybody got their notes? Last couple of classes? Say it again. Light. He created light. The first day, he created light. We'll see, you understand that light has so many functions and purposes for us in this life. Could we function without light? Could we? Why not? Yeah, plants for number one. That's a big one, isn't it? Plants can't survive without light. And we need those things for food, and especially in this particular day. We know that eventually, once we get over to chapter 9 of the book of Genesis, that he's going to introduce animals into the diet, seemingly for the first time. And thank God that he did that. Thank God that he did that. Man, I like steak. I'm not a real big fan of green beans, but I love steak. And so I'm glad that he went there. But in the outset, the only thing that he created for human consumption was the greenery or the vegetation of this world. And so without light, man can't even be sustained physically, can he? All right, so that's one good reason that we know that he created light. On day number 2, what did he create? Day number 2, anybody remember? Say again? Yeah, the firmament, or our atmosphere, All right, and so like we mentioned on last week or the week before last, don't get caught up in the term firmament. It's really not a good translation. All right, the term firmament is not. It implies something that is firm, and that's where the word comes from, something that is solid. And I was doing some research on that as well. And as far back as I could tell, and some of the other guys in here that might know some more about that, is that it comes from the Septuagint translation. So the Septuagint translation was made for the library in Alexandria, Egypt in about the 3rd century BC. And so the Pharaoh at that particular time wanted the Hebrew scriptures translated into Greek at that particular time because, you know, in the 3rd century BC, of course, you know, Hellenism is the order of the day. Alexander the Great has come and gone, but now the Greeks have conquered the world and they are still in charge of the world at that particular point. But the Pharaoh wanted the Hebrew scriptures translated, and they had a paganistic idea that the heavens were comprised of a vault, a solid vault. And so the word that they utilized for firmament in Genesis chapter 1 was a word that they intentionally used to describe something, a big vault, because of their paganistic ideas and their false doctrines. Well, at any rate, whenever it's the scriptures translated into Latin, Jerome in the Vulgate took that term and knowing what it meant and used a word that we transliterated firmament. All right, and so it sounds like that in the Latin as well. And so that's why we have that particular translation, but it really is an expanse, all right, just like was mentioned just a moment ago. And of course that expanse is what? What do we understand it as or know it as? Our atmosphere, right? Our atmosphere. So we talked about what the atmosphere was comprised of, showing us again that God did not do anything arbitrarily, but everything had a purpose. Then we get to day number 3 of creation. And of course, we see him separating the waters that are on the earth. And not only that, but allowing the vegetation. Yeah, sorry, Brother Mark. I saw your hand up back there and I got going. Go ahead.
One of the things we often overlook is right there in the first 3 words and throughout the rest of the 6 days, it's the concept of time.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I appreciate it came to pass.
Absolutely. Man, absolutely, brother. And definitely when we get to day 4, which we're going to in just a moment here.
The concept of time that is here on earth does not exist in eternity.
Yeah, exactly. And so God made that for us. All right. And so exactly. Day number 3, we see the vegetation again being created. We talked about how that certainly is something that proves that the days are actual 24-hour periods and not ages, as the day-age theory wants you to believe, because of the fact that plants need the sun in order to reproduce and to survive and reproduce. All right, so day number 4, get to day number 4. And again, you go back to the genius of what God did with the plants. Is one thing that Moses makes sure to tell us is that every one of these plants, they yielded fruit after their kind. They all had their seed within their cells. All right, so just how ingenious is that? How beautiful is that plan that you can continue to reproduce this food because God made it with seeds that are able to reproduce. All right, day number 4. What's created on day number 4? Sun, moon, stars, the astronomical elements. And whenever you take a look at the astronomical elements, and we understand that they're multi-purposeful where they are concerned. What are the purposes according to what the Bible says? Somebody read verse number 14 and read down to verse number 19. Somebody read verse 14 to 19 for us.
God said, "Let there be light
So reading from those verses, Moses writes for us what are the multifaceted purposes of the astronomical elements. Now, we know there's a lot more than what we just see given here, and Moses' intention was not to write a science book. And you get into the field of science, astronomy, and you understand there's a whole lot more to the story. But again, that's not Moses' purpose. His purpose is to exalt God and show our origins, and that God is to be glorified because he is our creator. All right, but what are some of the purposes that Moses does mention here? Yeah, so the calculation of time. Brother Mark mentioned calculation of time. God put these astronomical elements up there, namely the sun and the moon, for the calculation of time. All right, we don't have the ability to do that. If we wanted to do it, if it was just up to Brother Morgan and me and Brother Dink and Sister McDonald to come up with time, what comprises a day, we might have different ideas of what comprises a day. Sister McDonald might say, I got too much to do, so I want it to be 48 hours a day. And Morgan's like, no, I want to get this thing over with, so I just want the day to be 6 hours. All right, and then I definitely need a day to be about 120 hours. All the stuff I try to pack into one. All right, but God didn't leave that to chance, right? So he gave us these astronomical elements to help us to be able to calculate time. All right, what else? What other purpose do we see here?
The plants for agricultural purposes.
Well, absolutely, that's it, for agricultural purposes. Now, he doesn't really explicitly state that, but we know from what we understand about the scientific process that that is the case. All right, photosynthesis is absolutely necessary for the reproduction of plants. All right, what else? Anything? Anybody see anything else? Yeah, the seasons. All right, so that just be a broader calculation of time. Absolutely. All right, so days, seasons, years, or years, seasons. Seasons, years. All right. Anything else? Obviously, for light, he mentions for light. I think about one thing. Here's something I think about as well. I'm an artist by trade. Whenever I went to the secular school, it was for graphic design. So aesthetic beauty is something that I love about God's creation. I love that about God's creation. Can you relate to that? You guys are spending time out in nature, just looking around at things. Do you appreciate that? I know we got some hunters in here, and so I know you guys have. I think I was talking to one of Megan brothers about this, about being in a tree stand or whatever before the sun comes up. When you're deer hunting or whatever, and it's one of the most beautiful things is you're out there for a purpose to harvest the deer, but man, there's some mornings where I sit in a tree stand, I'm like, whether I get anything or not, man, this was worth being here as you watch the sun come up and you see all of the animal kingdom be able to come alive, and this is absolutely beautiful. Yes, sir.
Also, some of us, if it wasn't for dying, we'd probably never raised.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one, too.
And as someone mentioned a while ago, also, we don't realize that the plants and other creatures also, they have a cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And so we'll get into that in just a moment as well, a little bit deeper.
Yeah, Terrance, you alluded to it earlier. Colossians 1:16 and following says that all things were created by him,
Yeah.
and for him.
Right.
You alluded to the ubiquity of nature and everything we see around us. It's not really a theory, but I've always thought about this idea that there's not anything that we can see created that doesn't make us think about Jesus. And not only that, all men and women of all times, in all places, understand what plants are, what trees are, what flowers, salt,
Right.
light,
Right.
darkness, all of these things, so that it's almost like you cannot miss who God is.
Yeah, that's Romans 1. That's right. That's right. And so people are without excuse. The only way they miss it is if they intentionally want to. And of course, unfortunately, we got a lot of people in this world that intentionally want to miss it. And so at the end of the day, I was listening to Brother Jeff Miller give a sermon that was called and entitled, Why Are There So Many Atheists? And he had a lot to say. It's a 45-minute sermon, but he boiled it all down to one point, and he made it at the very beginning of the sermon. So people want to do what they want to do. They don't want to be held accountable to a higher power. They want to do what they want to do, and so ultimately people will defy all intelligence, all rationale, in order to try to pretend like they're in a position where they don't have to be accountable to a God. And so wrote a paper, a manuscript. Years ago, it was too long to copy. I think it's 20 pages, so I didn't copy it. But if anyone wants a copy, they can certainly have it. But I dealt with Psalm 14 and the fool said in his heart, there is no God, and sort of dealing with atheism and how it's such a foolish argument. God tells you at the outset atheism is foolish, and then kind of go through the paper, the study, and show how it is foolish from a scientific standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a scriptural standpoint. It's foolish. Now, document people in there like Phil Zuckerman and Richard Dawkins, who are very open and very eager to call us foolish and insane and stupid for believing in a creator, and to show how no, really their position is the one that's foolish and insane and stupid. Whenever you just take that thing and break it down, it's easy just to spout off words and bump gums and talk noise. But let's break this thing down and look at it from a scientific standpoint, from a common sense standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, and see who really is taking the foolish position. And every day, 10 times out of 10, it's them and not us. All right, so good stuff. Any other comments at this juncture? Yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry. My bad. I'm so used to saying yes, sir.
The moon controls the tides, which controls like all of ocean life, the reproduction of animals and plants, just like the sun for the plants on Earth. The moon has to do with that with the tides.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so again, like we said a moment ago, all those things are implicit in God's creation, and we see it, and we've come to a point to where we can test these things and observe these things through the processes of science. And again, it wasn't Moses' point to make you a science manual here. He's telling you where these things come from and what they're for in a very general sense. But absolutely, absolutely.
That's a good verse or passage section to reference to Genesis 1 is Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4.
Yeah.
Specifically in verse 3, there's no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Talking about
There it is.
declaring his handiwork and creation, just screaming. There's nowhere where it's not heard. There's nowhere where you can escape that. Going back to
That's just the facts of the matter. It's facts of the matter. I don't care where you live on this earth. You see the sun rise in the east and set in the west. You see the moon, as Lauren mentioned, the stars. You see the trees in the animal kingdom. Doesn't matter where you live. No one lives in any type of vacuum where these things aren't readily observable. And so no one has an excuse for not believing what Genesis teaches us is the truth. Sister Denny. Yeah. So that goes back to what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago is we see God's love all over these chapters. We see his care and his concern for us. So Sister Sheena is making the point that he didn't have to do the things. She said, he didn't have to make color. It's pleasurable to our eyes. He didn't have to make foods that are pleasurable to our palate. He didn't have to we're going to talk about marriage as we get into chapter 2. He didn't have to do these things, but he did because he loves us. He expects the human experience on earth to be a pleasurable one to some degree, all right, to be a fulfilling one to some degree. He didn't mean for it to be agonizing and trying and tumultuous. He meant for it to be a pleasant experience for us. As we'll see once we get to chapter 3, it's only the introduction of sin that makes that problematic and kind of derails God's program for us. Talking about just the beauty of what we observe. 1968, December 24th, Apollo 8 mission. All right, first 3 men to be able to go to the moon. And as fascinating as it was to see these men go to the moon, and I wasn't alive in 68, but I've heard the recordings and everything like that. And some of you guys who were alive may have been listening in whenever that actually took place. But what happened? Anybody remember what happened whenever these guys are orbiting the moon and they're looking back on Earth from the moon? Anybody remember what these guys did? The astronauts were Bill Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman. Anybody remember what they did? Yeah. They read from Genesis chapter 1. So they got people listening in. This research said they had sent a satellite into orbit that made it possible for us and some European nations and some other people to be able to hear the whole flight to the moon. And whenever they are looking back, they're awestruck. And when they're trying to think of what to say, what to do, man, they realize, hey, let's get the Bible out and read from Genesis chapter 1. And so those are men who knew what it was about, at least to a degree, understood the magnitude of what they were doing and what they were observing. They read from the book of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 10. I remember a few years back, I got a call from a family in Oklahoma, a lady that was my first Sunday school teacher. Her name was Sister Pearlie Mae Hightower. Had passed away, very, very dear and near to my heart, always like a grandmother to me. Wasn't a biological grandmother, but I was actually cousins to some of her biological kids because of marriage between our families. And so she was just like a grandmother to me. And so whenever she passed away, they called and asked if I'd come do the funeral. Like, absolutely. Didn't have a very big window of time, so I had to just fly in and do the funeral, fly right back out. And I remember flying home that next morning. I think the funeral was on a Friday. Maybe it was a Friday because I was flying home on, a Saturday morning. But made the flight, scheduled the flight as early as I could because I had stuff to do when I got home. And so whenever the plane lifted off, it was still dark outside, man. I was dog tired, and so I went to sleep right away. Whenever I opened my eyes, Dink, man, I saw really one of the most radiant, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life, man. Second only to my wife, obviously. But, man, when I opened my eyes and I was looking toward the window, I had my window open, and, man, the clouds, we were above the clouds, almost kind of parallel, but just a little bit above the clouds, and the sun was just coming up over those clouds, man, and it just looked like a fire furnace in the sky, man. I mean, there was nothing white there. Everything was red and orange, and it's the most beautiful thing, that you can set your eyes on outside of humanity. And, when we talk about God's material earth, and it just lets me know, man, the only thing I can think of is, man, God is a master artist. He's a master artist, so I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Well, one thing to note is that evolution has no real explanation for pure aesthetic.
None whatsoever. That's exactly right. Exactly right. It talks about functionality and things like that. But as far as, like I said, pure aesthetic beauty, it's got no explanation for that. Brother Mark.
I grew up with Houston in the early 60s, and so I was blessed to shake the hand of most of the first astronauts.
Oh, really? Interesting.
They would come around and tour the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And meet us all in the elementary school and stuff. But I remember Gordo Cooper, one of the first astronauts, and it was noted that when he was making his first orbits, that they heard him say, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
And they said, "What's the matter, Gordo?" He said, "I'm not talking to y'all."
Yeah, I know that's right.
He was overwhelmed.
Man, I'm
Seen from that first point that anyone had ever seen from.
That's it. When we just walk around Earth and just observe things from our perspective that we live in day by day, if you're observant, you see the beauty of everything that surrounds you. But certainly when you're in those rare positions, like I said, being in, yeah, absolutely. Right. Exactly. Exactly. All right, so we can spend a lot of time talking about that. But those are astronomical elements. Day number 6. Day number 6. So let's get down to day number 6, and we'll see what God created. Verse number 20, beginning, and we'll read all the way down to verse number 25. Anybody wants to read, please. Say it again. Did I skip a day? What'd you say? What'd you say? Oh, did I? Okay, now we're on astronomical elements. So that's day number 4. Evening, morning, fourth day. You're on day number 5. All right, verse number 20. Somebody want to read there? 20 to 25.
God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the living creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth, and open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply,
So whenever you begin to observe again, birds and fish, and you see God as such a masterful artist, but then again, you also see the functionality of things. When we look at the kingdom of the birds, so what do we notice about genders with birds? So you guys that do some hunting, you know this. What do you notice about the gender with the birds? Yeah, so which one is most elaborate in color? Yeah, the males are always most elaborate. When you look at peacock, turkey, so many different, the males are elaborate. And, why do you think that is? Because women are hard to please, man, I guess. Not really sure why, man, but man, because in the human spheres, it's different. It's opposite. The Bible talks about in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and woman, her hair being her glory and things like that. And whenever you look at the way things naturally are, women's hair is a lot more glamorous and glorious than ours is, right, Brother John? So, I'm getting me too, man. I'm getting thin up there. I'm just taller than you, so people can't see mine. Yeah, that's right. That's it. So it's different. And among birds, Sheena and I were watching National Geographic or something, had these birds in this rainforest, and how when it come to mating season, man, this male bird was doing so much. He was pitch black, man, as black as could be. And you never couldn't see his color, but when it was mating season, man, he started twirling his tail and stuff like tail feathers and start twirling. I mean, it looked like, one of those little things you used to do like that. And this bright, brilliant red dish shows up, man. And you think about that, man, how ingenious is that? How perfect and wonderful is that? And that's just one bird. That's just one bird. And we think about all the different species of birds that exist and all the things they do. You look at the bald eagle and all of its majesty. God, you can't think about those things and not think about the glory of God. It's like Kyle mentioned a moment ago from Psalm chapter 19, verse 1 through 3. The glory of God, if what he created is this beautiful, if what he created is this majestic, if what he created is this glorious, man, how glorious must he be? Because we always know that the principle that's mentioned in the book of Hebrews chapter 3 is that the builder is worthy of more honor than that which is built. The house builder, of course, the Hebrew writer is talking about the house of God, and how that Christ is better than Moses because Moses was a steward in God's house, but Christ is over the house. That's the point that he's making. And he says, of course, the one that made the house is worthy of more honor than the house itself. Moses was a part of the house. Christ, it was his house. He made it. And so you just think about that principle and everything that God creates on this terrestrial ball and in the heavens. Man, if these things are this glorious, how glorious must God be? I've heard people ask this question: do you think we're going to know each other in heaven? Does anybody have any doubts about that? Have any doubts about it? Is the Bible clear enough on that matter? When we leave this life and enter into the next, it seems like people are going to know each other. Jesus Christ was on the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John had never seen Moses or Elijah, but yet still they knew exactly who they were. Because Peter says, Lord, let's make a church, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Put his foot in his mouth on that occasion. All right? And so, you look at the rich man and Lazarus. And so the Bible is very clear on that matter. Had someone want to refute that one time by saying this: well, I don't believe we're going to know each other in heaven because what am I going to do when I look around and see that somebody I love so much on this earth is not there? Man, it's going to be miserable for me. And I told her, you must not understand the glory and the majesty of God. I think that's the problem. That was my diagnosis for her. You must not understand the glory and the majesty of God. You're not going to be worried about anybody or anything else when you sit at the presence of the throne of God. And you look at the book of Revelation, chapter 4. Jason will get there eventually, chapter 5. And everything in heaven, man, what is their attention on? What is their focus on? You look at those 24 elders, those 4 living creatures. Man, these are majestic types of beings, even in and of themselves. But what are they doing? Go over to the book of Isaiah chapter 6, whenever Isaiah gets his calling, and he gets a glimpse of the throne room of heaven, and he sees the seraphim flying around. These are majestic creatures in and of themselves. They're not focused on anything but God. But God. And the glory of God is seen in all that he has created. So we see the fish, we see the birds. So much more can be said about them. Again, you watch these nature shows where they're able to take their cameras out there and observe nature, and you look at the sea and how vast it is and how many, it's beautiful to behold the things you see. She and I got to go to Alaska on a cruise for our 25th anniversary and never been somewhere where, we saw whales. Just you see them, they were out there just jumping up and down, or not really jumping, but, making their big, coming out of the sea, and never seen that except on television. Man, how wonderful. And it's made us think at every turn, man, how glorious is our God. Did you have another one? I thought you had your hand up again, Mark. Go ahead, brother. Yes, sir. Right.
We build the floor, the foundation first, and eventually the roof. The same way with nature. With God, we look at the logic and the systematic way in which creation took place. And it's just amazing to see how it all unfolds in the detail of things. The more and more we learn about nature every day,
Right.
and develops in his understanding of nature, we see as you're saying, the majesty and the glory of God.
Yeah, we can't even talk about the half of it in this class because I don't have the expertise to talk about the half of it in this class. I don't know if anybody else does either. Just to see what God has done and how he has done it, how things work together, it's phenomenal. It's really overwhelming even to think about.
But till the end of time, we'll be learning more.
That's right.
Glorifying God.
Yes, sir.
We have the right mindset.
Absolutely.
I was going to mention, while the males have more vivid colors in nature, women have more camouflage colors. You might see God's design and protection of the female.
Man, absolutely.
Do that into the bride of Christ, and Christ is taking all that upon himself to protect his bride.
Yeah.
Even in that, you see God's design.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when we get into the marriage on next time, we definitely spend some time in Ephesians 5 where we see the parallel and what our marriages are in this life are really type of the matrimony between Christ and the church. And so definitely good to draw those parallels out, and we'll spend more time with them in subsequent studies as well.
Terrance, if I can slow you down just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
To me, I've always been fascinated that nature, evolution would say things need to be utilitarian to serve a purpose. But you don't have to look at creation very long to see that there are things that are put here seemingly for no other purpose than the enjoyment of man.
It's a beautiful.
All the different shapes and sizes and colors of fish. You mentioned the bird a while ago. You think about the ostrich and the hummingbird and everything in between. Well, why all that variety? We could have just had chickens.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's for our enjoyment.
There's no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt about it. God had us in mind. He had you in mind when he was creating everything prior to creating you on that sixth day. All right? So we get into the sixth day, and we see he begins to create the terrestrial beast. Terrestrial beast, all right? So there's our time. But we'll get into this one next time. Again, take one of the outlines if you want it, kind of a more updated outline. And then also up here, if you want to come get one, got an outline on the first home. We're going to get heavily into that on next time, be it the Lord's will. And if you want to get a little head start, you're more than welcome to come get one of these in just a little while. All right? Thank you for your attention.